So if you saw my previous video on some things that you should consider before you pick up your first DSLR or mirrorless camera, well, today I'm going to be going through the list that I put together to help me pick out my perfect camera, which is the Panasonic G85, and to help you pick out your perfect or ideal camera. And we'll be talking about it coming up next. Hey, what's up guys, it's Diana here with Entree Woman TV, helping transition your passion into the business that you love so you can create the side hustle that you want. And on this channel, I do small business development tips as well as video marketing tips like we'll be talking about today. So if that's something up your alley, definitely consider subscribing. So I recently did a video on some things that you should consider before you pick up your first mirrorless or DSLR camera. Basically, if you're transitioning from your smartphone for recording videos and you're trying to get into a real camera. Well, I had a great question on that comment, and that was by Los Barrel. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. So he asked, or I think it's a he, and so I've been waiting like 4 months since my birthday, I'm assuming, to get a new camera. I'm finally going to get one. The timing of this video is great. I do need some 4K, but good 1080p is a must. So want 4K plus something that is good in low light. What do you think? It's kind of hard to answer a question like that, but that is a great question, Low Sparrow, and I'll be glad to answer it in this video as well as help some of the other community members. So I can post a list of things that are super important to me to pick out my ideal camera, which is the Panasonic G85. Recording this on the Panasonic G7. I came up with a list of about 10 or 11 things. You know, about 5 of those things are like absolute must-have, and that's what I suggested in response to the question that we got today. And there's some other things that are like secondaries, kind of important. So let's get into the list. So the must-haves that I had written down was, the first thing, it had to be a flip out screen. Without a doubt, if the camera did not have a flip out screen, I don't want it. It had to have some kind of a feature so that I can see myself. If it doesn't have something like that, or like the M6 and M3 flipped up, that's by Canon, if it didn't have that or something, then it does me no good. I don't want to use, whatever Sony's tilt screen feature. That wasn't going to work for me. So a flip up screen or flip out screen, absolutely must have. Second thing was 4K video to be considered an upgrade from what I already had, which was at max 1080p 60 on the Canon M6. And it at least had to have 1080p 60. Ideally, yeah, it's nice to have 120 frames per second or 180 frames per second or what have you, but it had to at least have 60 frames per second, because that is a good and a really decent slow motion feature. I enjoy it and it works fine. I don't do slow motion a lot, so more than that is not a deal breaker, but at least 1080p 60, but it has to have some kind of 4K. Third thing, it has to be a mirrorless. At this point, I've already had a DSLR camera before, and there are things like an electronic viewfinder that you get on the Panasonic G7 as well as the Panasonic G85 that I have here in my hand. And just any mirrorless camera, it has just about an EVF. So some don't, like the M6 and the M3, but that's okay. It wasn't like an absolute deal breaker, but to be considered an upgrade camera, it had to have an EVF, and it had to be mirrorless. So it's just some stuff that comes with mirrorless that I wanted, so no DSLRs. The fourth thing, it had to have clean HDMI out. And what that means is that there are HDMI ports that are on the camera, or a port that is on the camera. I believe this one is a micro HDMI. But what this allows me to do is to be able to use this camera as a web camera. So whether I'm out traveling or if I'm here at home in the office, then I will be able to take this camera and use it as a webcam. I've done since I've had the G85, nearly all of my streams that I've done here on YouTube, any that I do on Facebook or anything like that, I'm always using the Panasonic G85. I've even used the G7 before, so it had to have that clean HDMI out, because if it didn't, like the Canons didn't, you'd get all the menu options and everything that's flashing on the screen. That's just tacky, and I didn't want to do that. So the fifth and final thing was, it had to have a microphone jack, because most of the features that I'm describing could be something like a Sony RX10 or something like that. I think it is, or RX100. I'm not exactly sure. I think it's like a RX100. This is a little point and shoot camera. But the thing is that it also needed to be an interchangeable lens camera. Otherwise, you know, I could get a point and shoot camera and get away with it and be done, or something like that. So, or one of those, I think it's like Panasonic has the FZ 100s or whatever. It's like this super big lens that zooms in and out. So that was the last points that were important that was on my must-have list. So let's get to the secondary stuff. Okay, secondary stuff is not as important. It's like, these are not the deal breakers, but it's things that I really want the camera to have. So one of those things was more features. With the M6, they had just added in time lapse. So it's like, okay, this is great, you know, be able to do it, but I don't use it that often. And it's like, that's just about it. You know, that was one of the few things that was new from the M3 to the M6 was dual pixel autofocus versus the hybrid autofocus and time-lapse feature. And I'm like, well, yeah, now I think about it, didn't really warrant much of an upgrade. But I didn't really think about it because I was only thinking about Canon. I had never even thought about really Panasonic because all I saw was the GH5 and G7. I didn't even know this camera existed at the time. Some of those features, like what this one have, and I know people have gotten upset with me, I'm sorry, that I only say it has so many more features than the Canon, but some of those that these Panasonic cameras have that are different are like the 4K post focus, the 4K live cropping, time-lapse feature, as well as the stop motion animation. And I think most of you guys have enjoyed the Tale of Two Lenses. A little mini series. It was a stop motion animation mini series that I have here on the channel. So link up above. Is it this one? It's over here. So the YouTube card, if you want to check that out. There's stuff like that, just being able to have fun with the camera, that I wanted to be able to do with an upgrade to the M6. So the next thing on my list was it had to have good autofocus. Decent autofocus is what I considered for the Canon M3. It may falter back and forth sometimes. And even though people, you know, really give contrast autofocus a hard time, I've not had any real issues with the Panasonic G85 and not even really with the G7. I mean, people talk about low light capabilities, and that's actually not anything that I even have on my list here. But people talk about low light capabilities. I watched several videos all the way back beyond like the second and third pages of searching and researching cameras for the ones that I wanted to check out, to the videos that doesn't have hardly any views, just to see what anybody that is experienced or anyone that is not really experienced with cameras, if they're first taking out the box and do some basic settings, what does it look like to them? Found some people that, you know, found some settings that work for them and went with it. I'm like, I'm sold, I'm good to go. As long as I know that it can do it, I'm good to go. So the autofocus has not been a hindrance at all with anything that I want to do. Only thing that I noticed different recently that I just discovered this week, between the Panasonic G85 and the Canon M6, and I'm wondering if it's something I was doing or what, but I'm not really sure. I have to play around with it some more. But just like the touch autofocus, if I want to rack focus or what have you, instead, and I know I've done it before, but I just didn't do it this time. Instead of it smoothly going from this image to this image, it will do that kind of jitter where it contrasts. It goes from behind you to in front of you, and then it stops directly on whatever that is. And it's like milliseconds that it does that, but it's just, I want it to be boom, boom, and be done with it. That is not something that I even do a lot. So again, it wasn't a deal breaker. It needed to have good autofocus, not decent autofocus. And I really love the autofocus options that I get on these Panasonic cameras, because it's not just single point or continuous autofocus. It's a lot of different kinds of autofocus. I have like 5 different autofocus options, and I really do go through all of them. So I really like what the Panasonic offers in that particular category. So it was a win for me there. So another thing to consider that, you know, I wanted, like most cameras have some form of stabilization. The Canons didn't have that built-in in-body image stabilization. This does. In addition to that, it has this dual autofocus, this dual stabilization, where the lens has it built into the lens and the camera has it built into the camera. And when you use a lens like this that's on here now with the G85, or even Panasonic G9 that they have out now, they both work in tandem so that you are getting just super smooth. And then on top of that, you can add digital if you want, and it'll crop in just a little bit and it'll be even smoother. But just the two by themselves working normally, it's wonderful. Okay, so only 3 more things left on the list. So the 4th thing was unlimited recording times. Most have this issue where they run into a taxing issue where if they go over 30 minutes, recording time is considered a camcorder and the tax is different. So most companies don't want to pay that. I guess Panasonic pays that for us. So thank you, Panasonic, because there is unlimited recording times on the Panasonic G85 as well as the GH5. Those are the only 2 that I know of. Let me know if you know any more, but those are the only 2 that I know of from Panasonic that have unlimited recording times. 5th thing on my secondaries list, reasonably priced lenses. Now these secondaries list is not in any particular order, but I would say this would be closer to the top if it was, because when I looked at Sony and I was considering, well, it doesn't have the flip out screen. Can I live without it? And I'm like, well, yes, no, I don't know, maybe so. And I was like, oh, I'll get an HD monitor, 4K monitor. And I'm like, can I? I'm like, no, I can't deal with that. Reasonably priced lenses, Sony was out real quick with that one. Excuse me. So Panasonic, I looked at not just the new, but the used prices. Canon is probably the best out of everyone when it comes to the new and used market prices for lenses. So I'm like, okay, well, we'll see. And then the last thing was a good camera app with Wi-Fi. Now Canon actually does have that, but Panasonic I think is a little bit better because it lets you do way more with the Wi-Fi. But of course Canon would be out because they didn't have anything with 4K. Now they have the M50, which I think is a good beginner option, but at the same time, if it's going to switch to contrast detection, autofocus, when I'm going in there and it's cropping even worse than a Micro Four Thirds would, I don't want it. That's my personal opinion. I don't want it. I mean, those 5 major things are my major, without a doubt, it has to have, microphone. It's like some stuff is just not a question. It should already be there, but, just writing it down. And then of course, interchangeable lenses would make that 6. But, those are my things that I preferred. And those are the things that I kind of help my clients with if I'm helping them to consider getting their own camera for the first time, or just you guys in the comments in the community here. But let me know, did I miss something on the list? Is there something that you think that's important that I didn't include? So let me know down in the comments down below. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think. But thanks for checking out today's video. Definitely consider subscribing if you enjoy content like this. If you want another video by Entree Woman TV, make sure you click or tap the screen right here. And if you missed the video that I did before this one, where I was like some things that you should consider before you pick up your first camera, different than the list options we talked about today, make sure you click or tap the screen right there. But as always, my friends, live with passion. I'll see you guys on the next video.